Hey everyone, how's it going? Matthew Bailey Media here, and before I get into it, yes, I am officially back from my vacation from last week, and I hope you all enjoyed that video I posted. But as you can tell by the title of this video, this will be the first video in a long line of videos I'm going to do where I do a tier list ranking all these different types of movies that are part of certain categories. Like in this instance, I'm doing my tier list for all of the billion-dollar movies that have come out, which now includes Barbie. And I'm ranking them in the tier list based on how well I thought they did. And like I said, this will be the first video in a long list of videos that are to come. So keep an eye out on my new playlist of my tier list videos that I'm going to be doing, with this first one being ranking all 53 movies that made $1 billion. So let's get into it. Okay, here we go, guys. So this, as you can see, this is my tier list for all of the billion-dollar movies that have come out, which includes Barbie now. And like I said, these are all movies that have made over $1 billion at the box office. And as you can see, I've got S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, D tier, and F tier. And I also got haven't seen, because there are a few movies that are on here that I think I haven't actually seen yet. And I need to make sure that you guys are fully aware of that. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. So as we see, the first movie on this list is Alice in Wonderland. Now, and this is the movie that was, I believe, directed by Tim Burton. And it was the first Disney live-action remake to come out in over a decade, since I think 102 Dalmatians came out. And I gotta say, Tim Burton, I don't know how he was able to make a movie like this, especially when you think about Disney live-action remakes that have come out. Like I said, this is one of those remakes that I thought, this doesn't seem like it should be that dark. Because to be fair, I never saw the original animated film of Alice in Wonderland, but I know that it wasn't as dark as how Tim Burton depicted Alice in Wonderland. I mean, it's not that too much of a bad film, though. Again, I still think it's a really good film, but not too good. So for me, I'm probably going to put this in the D tier. I mean, it's not too bad. I mean, if it was really bad, it would probably be under F. But I still think it wasn't as good as I would hope it to be. So, next up is Despicable Me 3. Now, Despicable Me 3 is the third movie in the franchise. I'm calling it a franchise because it's not really 3 movies anymore. Because we also have 2 Minions movies that came out, which one of those is going to be on here. But in regards to the third movie in the franchise, I gotta say, this was definitely like an improvement on the first 2. If I had to rank all 3 movies, though, this one would probably be at number 1 out of the trilogy, and then you would probably have like 2 and 1. So I thought 1 was like the weakest one, but none of them were bad. But in regards to the third one, I thought it was definitely a really good, engaging story. Not as good as I was hoping for, but it still ended up being pretty good. So it's an okay film, and I'm probably going to have to put it in the C tier. I mean, it's not a bad film, I gotta say. It's definitely a good enough film to be rewatchable, is all I can really say. So now, next we got Frozen 2. And yes, I've seen both Frozen movies. First one's going to be on this list as well. But in regards to the second one, it's definitely an improvement, in my opinion, on the first movie. I do love the storyline it's telling. Like, it feels like it really is telling the story of Elsa and her transition from her in her development as a character when it comes to her ice powers and who she is. But it also throws in her sister Anna and how and this movie really does explain the reasoning for her having powers and Anna not having powers. And it's like, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Frozen 2, but it's like Elsa says in the movie, a bridge has 2 sides, and their mother had 2 daughters, where their mother, as it turns out, is from this mysterious group of villagers in a magical forest, and their father was of the normal people, and by them two getting together and having two daughters, one with powers, one without, they thought that's why they say that a bridge has two sides, and they had two daughters that could bridge the divide. And I thought that was a good type of storytelling. I still think it was a really great film, I gotta say. I'm also really excited for Frozen 3 because that was announced recently during this year. So I'm going to have to put Frozen 2 in the A tier. I thought it was really good, I have to say. Next up is Furious 7. Now, I've seen pretty much every Fast and the Furious movie, even the 10th one that came out. But this, I think, is one of the few movies that came out in the Fast and the Furious franchise to get into the $1 billion club. And this was, unfortunately, the last movie to have Paul Walker in the movie as Brian O'Connor. May he rest in peace. And I gotta say, I did kind of like this one. I gotta say, it's not... I feel like this movie definitely was a good send-off to Brian O'Connor, played by Paul Walker. He really knew how to... He really did know how to, the way they handled his send-off at the end of the movie was really heartwarming, and I really do appreciate that they did that for him. It's just a shame that after the Furious 7 movie, they had the last few movies we've gotten, Furious 8, Hobbs and Shaw, which was a spin-off, and then Furious 9. Out of all the movies, Furious 9 is the only one after Furious 7 that really went off the rails. But when it comes to this one, it was a proper send-off, especially to Paul Walker's character. And I have to say, I might actually need to put it above Frozen 2 in the A tier. I thought it was really good, I have to admit. Next up is Jurassic World. Now, this is the first movie in the new trilogy of Jurassic World films that came out after the original Jurassic Park franchise. Now, I gotta say, if y'all remember seeing my review of Jurassic World Dominion that came out last year, I gotta say, it seems like they were on a pattern, in a way, where the first movie is great, the second one ends up being a little meh, and then the third one ends up being like the worst of the franchise. But again, when you think about the first Jurassic World and the first Jurassic Park, which also is on this list, I gotta say, this one I thought was okay. I mean, it could have been a lot better if they had really tried to bring back some of the original characters. Like, I don't know why they had to bring back all three of the original trio in the third Jurassic World movie, and you'll see what I'm about to say in a minute in regards to that one. But with this one, I thought it was an okay movie. I definitely don't think it deserves to be in the C tier, but I definitely think it was somewhat of an improvement, especially after the horrific Jurassic Park 3 that we got. So I'm going to probably put it in B tier. Like I said, it's not too good, but I thought it was definitely much better than I thought it was going to be. Next up is Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. Now, this is the fourth movie out of the 5 films that have come out, and if you guys know, I am a huge Johnny Depp fan, and I even covered his win during his trial with Amber Heard last year, and I gotta say, I will admit, after the original trilogy of Pirates of the Caribbean films, this one definitely didn't do too well for me, because during the events of At World's End, they hinted at the Fountain of Youth as being the next possible thing that they went after. And I thought it was going to be good, but then, when the movie came out, it sort of drained a little bit of what made Jack Sparrow who he is. I mean, not too much, though. The 5th movie definitely did that, but there was a reason why he didn't do so well in the 5th movie. But it's only the 4th and 2nd movie in this list. But when it comes to the 4th movie, I didn't think it was that good, but it wasn't that bad either. I'm probably going to put it in the C tier. I'm probably going to put it behind Despicable Me 3. because I still thought that was better than this one. Now we move on to the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie, Dead Man's Chest. And like I said, this was a great film when it comes to introducing the next major baddie that Jack Sparrow had to go up against for the next two films, and that was Davy Jones. And it also kind of introduced us to another major villain character of Cutler Beckett, and it was I feel like this movie really did develop the characters a lot more, and so that by the time it got to the third movie, they were well established as to who they are and what they did after the events of the first film. And I really love how they developed Davy Jones. And like I said, I wish the third movie was in this list of movies that came out that made $1 billion, but I still thought this one was pretty dang good. If I had to put it on a list, I'd probably put it in the B tier, just above Jurassic World. I really did think it was a good film. And I don't know what else to say. So the next movie in the $1 billion club is Skyfall, which is apparently a James Bond movie that had Daniel Craig playing him. This is one of those $1 billion movies that unfortunately I have not seen yet. So I'm just going to put it under my haven't seen. Next up is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. This is the first movie this is technically part 1, obviously, of the entire Skywalker saga, is what they ended up calling it. And I will say, I thought it was an okay way of introducing us to the Star Wars universe. And thankfully, this was before Disney ended up acquiring the rights to the franchise. And we'll get to the new trilogy in a second. But with this one definitely was a good way to sort of fill in the gaps, in a way, of what happened during episodes 4, 5, and 6 when it comes to Anakin Skywalker and who he was and how he was introduced as one of the most powerful Jedi there is, and he was like the chosen one in a way. And we understand now why he had some struggles with Luke during the original trilogy. This movie definitely kind of was a good way to introduce his character. I think Luke Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, the way they introduced him in this movie was a pretty good way to do it. I still think it's not A tier, I should say, but I still think it was a good way to introduce his character to the franchise. I'm probably going to put it in B tier, just above Jurassic World, but definitely below Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. I think it was a really good way to introduce his character. Now, the next movie on the list, unfortunately, is Transformers: Age of Extinction. Now, this, of course, is the fourth movie of the Transformers franchise to be directed by Michael Bay. And you know that a lot of his movies, specifically the second, fourth, and fifth movies, were like one of the worst rated movies of all time when it comes to his films. And I gotta say, I have to agree, it's a shame they couldn't bring back Shia LaBeouf to continue the franchise after that, but I think there's a reason why that happened. Something happened between the third and fourth movies with Shia LaBeouf, and I can see why they didn't bring him back. But for them to choose Mark Wahlberg to take his place, and the jokes that they cracked in this movie, and the fact that they sort of changed up, like there's even one character, Autobot, in this movie whose voice actor was in the third movie, but he voiced a totally different character. And then when that character does show up for a brief flashback sequence in this movie, it's completely voiced by someone different. And I hate that they did that. And it's funny because they also make it seem like there were two characters that we thought were dead during the events of Dark of the Moon, which we'll talk about that in a minute. And then one of them ends up being alive in this movie, and they didn't really explain how he was still alive. So, anyways, I'm going to have to put this movie, unfortunately, in the F tier. Like I said, it's not a great film. Now we're moving on to Transformers: Dark of the Moon, which is the predecessor to Age of Extinction. I will say this was so when it comes to ending off the Shia LaBeouf trilogy of Transformers from Michael Bay, I will say this one definitely was somewhat of an improvement when it comes to how badly the second one was received. But the way that they ended his character arc of Sam Witwicky, I thought it was an okay story arc throughout the three films. Unfortunately, after the second film, they also had to give him a different girlfriend because of whatever was going on with Megan Fox at the time. But I will say it's definitely much better than Age of Extinction. Not too good though. I still gotta say there's too much action and they didn't really focus on the characters. I'm gonna have to put it in the D tier, probably just behind Alice in Wonderland. I still thought it was a much better movie than Age of Extinction, but still I did not understand why they kept going with this franchise after Dark of the Moon. Now on to the Disney live-action film Aladdin. Now this is where we get into some of the Disney live-action remakes that I thoroughly did enjoy. Not too good, but if I had to say, Will Smith did an amazing job at replacing the late Robin Williams, may he rest in peace, as the genie in live-action form. I mean, he put his own spin on it, and I do commend him for that. And I gotta say, I don't know what it is with these Disney live-action remakes, but when you look at how well they were doing during this time when Aladdin came out, man, it really does suck though that they had to especially after 2019, they just have been getting worse and worse for the Disney live-action remakes. But and I think Aladdin was the last one that came out live-action wise before it started to go really downhill for live-action Disney remakes. But when it comes to Aladdin, I did thoroughly enjoy the new spin on the story. I mean, I didn't think it was that good of a film, but I still think it was probably better than these two, Phantom Menace and Jurassic World. I still thought it was an okay movie to be put in the B tier. Definitely something that anything you see in the A, B, and B tiers, or even the S tiers, I would probably watch them more than once, or I would watch them over again. Next up is Aquaman. Now, Aquaman is is the only DCEU movie, I should say, that managed to make $1 billion. Now, you know that when I first saw this movie, I didn't know about what was going on with Amber Heard and Johnny Depp at the time. But now that I will say, if I had not known what was going on between them back then, I would definitely probably put this in like a C tier, I should say. But because of what's been going on, I didn't think it was that bad of a movie. Sure, Amber Heard is in it, but she's not really the main focus, obviously. And when it comes to the overall story, I still think it was a decent film. So it actually will still go in C tier, but it's going to go behind On Stranger Tides. I think it was an okay movie. I just still think even if I didn't know about the whole Amber and Johnny thing, it probably would have been in front of these two, but because I know about it, it's behind them. So next up, we're moving on to Avengers Age of Ultron. So basically, all 4 Avengers movies are in here, but the first one we're going to talk about is the second movie, Age of Ultron. Now, this is the only one out of the two. This is one of 2 of the 4 Avengers movies that was directed by Joss Whedon, who unfortunately had to go and mess up the Justice League movie from the DCEU. And I gotta say, I don't know what they were thinking about this movie. I mean, it was a good way to introduce the characters of Wanda Maximoff and Pietro Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, and everything, but the way they did the Ultron story, I mean, I never read the comics, but from what I hear, it wasn't even Tony Stark who created Ultron. It was Hank Pym. And, I mean, Hank Pym's in the MCU, and they made 3 Ant-Man movies, but they never said he was the one who made Ultron. I mean, if they had just introduced him, if they had introduced Hank Pym in Age of Ultron and say that he created Ultron, that would have made it a lot better for me. But because they did it the way they did it, I gotta say, this movie probably goes in the C tier, just above Aquaman. Like I said, it's still an okay film, I should say. It's just not great. like I said, the only movies that you'll probably see me liking a lot are the ones in the A and B and S tiers, obviously. So now we're moving on to Avengers Endgame. I don't even know what to say about this. That this movie is one of the first few that's going in the S tier for a successful way to end a saga of films that started in the year 2008 with the very first Iron Man movie. And I gotta say, this is definitely a way to end on a good note when it comes to the MCU. Now, unfortunately, the MCU has not been doing so well in regards to the after the events of Avengers Endgame. Well, technically, it's actually after Spider-Man Far From Home, actually. But we'll get to that in a bit. But now we move on to Avengers Infinity War, and I gotta say, this is the part 1 to the end of the Infinity Saga, and again, it's going in the S tier. I will say I do like Endgame more than this one, but it's definitely, these are two of my most highly successful films, in my opinion. It was the best way to end off on a good note when it comes to the Infinity Saga, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Now, next up, we have the live-action Beauty and the Beast. Now, I will say, I do kind of like this one more than Aladdin, I should say. It was a really good way to continue introducing Disney live-action remakes in a way. And again, movies like Aladdin and this are like much better films in live-action than other films have been. And I will say, this is probably going to be put in the A tier for the first time, but still behind Frozen 2. I still think Frozen 2 was a lot better at storytelling than this movie was. Next up, we have Black Panther. It's the first official MCU movie to actually talk about a different race character, and I think that this is the best way to tell a non-white character's story when it comes to, because I know there's been a lot of stuff going on over the last few years when it comes to race swapping white characters, and if you don't like that, then most people would automatically be claimed or called racist for it. But this movie is not like that. This movie actually tells a legit black character's story that I think really did do well for the late Chadwick Boseman. Unfortunately, may he rest in peace. But I will say that this was a good way to tell his story. It's not necessarily an origin story, but it was sort of a swing in the right direction, I should say, when it comes to all these characters that were introduced. And I still think it was a pretty decent film, but I'm only going to put it in the B tier, probably in front of Phantom Menace and Jurassic World. I still think it was a good film, I will admit. Next up is Captain America Civil War. Now, this is the third movie in the Captain America trilogy. Well, it's not really about to be a trilogy anymore because there's going to be a fourth movie coming out next year. But in regards to this one, this is one that I think people were really anticipating, because not only did it pin the two factions of leaders against each other from Captain America and Iron Man, but because the MCU really needed a push, especially since this was the first movie of Phase 3, it introduced us to one character that I am so glad they finally put in the MCU, and they're going to keep in the MCU for a little bit longer, and that was Spider-Man, played by Tom Holland. And I will say, his movies definitely are much better than what we got with the Andrew Garfield stuff, and at least the third movie for Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. But when it comes to this movie, I didn't think it was better than Black Panther, but I still think it was a decent watch, and I'm probably going to put it just above Despicable Me 3, I should say. It was definitely an okay film. Next up, we got the first Captain Marvel. Now, the only reason why this movie, I think, made $1 billion, I know a lot of people are saying this, but the main reason why this movie made $1 billion is because it was released in between the movies Infinity War and Endgame, and it was only released a couple of months before Endgame, so that's why it did so well. And I gotta say, I thought it was an okay film. I didn't think it was better than Black Panther, though, I will say that. or Captain America Civil War. But I will say, I definitely think I found it more intriguing, and more engaging than Age of Ultron. So I'm probably going to put it just above that in the C tier. Again, I think it was an okay film, but it definitely... I'm hoping that the Marvels kind of improves, especially with the directors being different for the sequel. Next up, we got The Dark Knight. Now, this is one of Christopher Nolan's really good films. Now, you guys may find this a bit surprising, but I've only seen it, I think, once in my life. It's been a long time. I'm not too sure how I feel about it. I may need to go back and rewatch it in order to fully rank it. So for now, I'm just gonna put it under haven't seen. I know I said I've seen it once, but that was a long time ago, and I may need to go back and rewatch it in order to actually fully understand it. And the same can be said for The Dark Knight Rises as well. This one is something I have not seen. I don't think I ever saw this one. I saw this one, but not this one. So it's gonna take... I may need to go back and watch these 3 movies in order to actually fully understand it. But next up, we got the 2019 live-action Lion King. Now, you guys know that I loved the original Lion King, and that movie is on this list too, so we'll get to that in a little bit. But in regards to the live-action version, I know Jon Favreau, who plays Happy Hogan in the MCU, directed this. He also directed The Jungle Book. But unfortunately, you know what I'm about to say, and that is the fact that I feel like he did a much better job at The Jungle Book than he did this one. This is like one of the worst reviewed movies, and I gotta say, I don't think it's as bad as Age of Extinction, but I will say it's definitely in the F tier. I mean, they really needed, even if they... I feel like they should have just made the animals somewhat animated still, but still make it look like it was live action, because then you would have at least given them some emotion. Because that was the one thing this movie was lacking, was emotion. Next up is Avatar from 2009, directed by James Cameron. Now, you know, this is one of my all-time favorite films of the entire time, and so is the sequel, but because James Cameron really does know how to tell a compelling story with really good visual effects, and he takes his time when developing these movies, especially when it comes to the visual effects, and he does present really good stories and life lessons in a way. And I definitely thought the first movie was definitely a good enough movie. You may find this surprising, but I'm gonna put it in the S tier, but unfortunately I'm gonna keep it behind Infinity War and Endgame, mainly because those 2 movies really were the best way to end a franchise. But I still think it was really good. Next up, we got Finding Dory, the sequel to the 2003 Finding Nemo. Now, it does sort of continue the story a little bit, but unfortunately, it's called Finding Dory now, and Dory is the front and center character in this story, and it explains her origin on how she even bumped into Marlin in the first place, and we got a little bit more on her backstory, and it's a way to really learn a lot of life lessons, especially when you have a disability like Dory did, which was short-term memory loss. But in regards to how I feel about the movie, I still think it was an okay film. It wasn't on like that great, but I still think it was a somewhat entertaining story. I'm actually going to put it at the top of C tier. Again, I thought it was a compelling story. It just wasn't too good. Next up, we got Frozen. Now, again, just like the second movie, I really did like the story, the way it was being told. And again, I didn't expect this movie that came out 10 years ago, actually, as a matter of fact. Look, the first Frozen movie came out 10 years ago, almost to the day, 2 months from now, and it will have been 10 years. And I gotta say, it still lives up to the hype when it comes to how well the story was telling. And I still think Frozen 2 is a little bit better, but I definitely will have to put this in the A tier. maybe just behind the first one, or the second one, sorry. These are both really good films to me, and I gotta say, these are definitely movies that I can rewatch over and over again and still be enjoyed. Next up is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Yep, that's correct. This is the final film in the Harry Potter franchise, and you know this movie's actually going in the S tier. It was such a good way to end off, just like with the Infinity War and Endgame movies. It was a great way to end off the Harry Potter franchise. It's a shame that they're trying to make a reboot, but turn it into a TV series now to give it a little bit more elbow room to tell certain stories. But you can never top the original franchise. I feel like Chris Columbus, who did the first two films, did such a great job developing and introducing the characters in a way. And then David Yates, who directed the 5th through the 8th movies, and he also directed the Fantastic Beasts franchise. Unfortunately, those movies weren't as successful financially as the Harry Potter films were, but especially this one. But I still think he did a much better job at ending the franchise than he was starting a new one. And again, he only directed the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th films of the Harry Potter franchise. And when you look at every single film that came out, his movies, along with Christopher Columbus, are like the best ones. Next up, we got Iron Man 3. Now, I gotta say, this movie is the only Iron Man movie that came out that a lot of people did not really enjoy, especially when it came to the little twist at the end when it comes to the main villain of being the Mandarin, and then when it's revealed who the guy was that was playing the Mandarin, and that's the key word here, playing the Mandarin, because it turns out the guy who was the Mandarin on TV was just an actor hired by the real villain of the film, which I thought was not really a great way to tell the story. I mean, it's a decent follow-up to the events of the first Avengers, but I still think it didn't do what I was hoping it to do, and I'm still going to put it just above Aquaman. I still thought it was on par with Age of Ultron, I should say. Definitely not as good as I was hoping for, but it was definitely something that I don't think I would rewatch over and over again. Next up, this may come as a surprise, is the 2019 movie Joker, with Joaquin Phoenix playing Arthur Fleck. And I will say, he did a great job portraying the character in his own solo adventure in a way. It was sort of also his origin story, I should say, showing how he became the villain we know him as today, as the Joker. Someone who has a good laugh, and even if it's about something that's related to murder. And I'm curious to see how well the sequel's going to do coming out next year. And it actually has Lady Gaga, if you believe it, playing Harley Quinn, not Margot Robbie. So I'm curious to see how well that ends up doing. But when it comes to this movie, I thought it was a great way to tell the origin of how the guy under the Joker makeup became who he was in the against Batman. And even though I haven't seen these two Batman movies, I still think this one was a great way and I will say that staircase dance really was the highlight of the movie. I thought it was a decent film. I'm going to put it in the A tier for me. But it's just at the bottom. I think it was a really good film when it comes to telling his origin. Now we move on to Jurassic Park, the original film that started the entire franchise. I will say nobody can ever beat out that first Jurassic Park. That movie was like a great way to finish or to start a franchise, but unfortunately, as the franchise continued, it really didn't get any good. I mean, the second Jurassic Park film was a meh. Third one people hated, and then we got to Jurassic World. It was somewhat of an improvement, but then the second movie, which we're about to get into next, Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. I gotta admit, this one definitely goes at the bottom, or not necessarily the bottom, but it goes in C tier because, in my opinion, they really went downhill when it comes to the Jurassic World franchise, or trilogy, I should say. I mean, you see I have the first movie in B tier, and then this one is in C tier. I don't know what it is, but they really should not be milking a franchise that much. And it's like, I don't know, once I get to the third Jurassic World movie, I'll explain a little bit more on why I feel this way. But for now, let's move on to the first movie of Minions. Now, this does sort of tell the origin of the Minions, who are sort of like henchmen to the main character of the Despicable Me franchise, which is Gru, and this shows exactly how they met Gru, however, it doesn't necessarily show how they're, like, what they did with him. That is the second movie, The Rise of Gru. Unfortunately, that did not make $1 billion. It almost did, but it didn't. But when it comes to the first movie, I think it was a good way to sort of tell the origin of the Minions and how they've actually been around for longer than we thought in that universe. I will say it's definitely an improvement over the Despicable Me 3, but I will definitely have to put it in the C tier. Come on, just above Finding Dory. I think it was a definite improvement when it comes to telling the origin of the Minions and how they first came to work for Gru. Next up, we got Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Now, this movie is kind of a prequel to what happens during the events of Episode 4, A New Hope, where it's revealed that these rogue freedom fighters are actually fighting back against the Empire, and they ended up stealing the plans for the Death Star, who they then try to give to Princess Leia, who unfortunately was not played by Carrie Fisher. May she rest in peace. At the end of this movie, they did put a little stand-in for her to make her look younger, but unfortunately, I thought this was not a good way to continue the franchise in the way I should. I mean, I still think it was an okay film. If I had to put it somewhere, I would probably put it just above Captain Marvel, I should say. That was definitely a much better improvement over all these ones. And like I said, it's definitely something that I wouldn't rewatch multiple times. Next up, we got Far From Home, Spider-Man Far From Home. This is the second movie in the first trilogy of Tom Holland's Peter Parker. Now, this takes place after the events of Endgame, unfortunately, where he's now lost Tony Stark as a mentor, and he's trying to live his normal life again. But unfortunately, because he helped save the universe, who we think is Nick Fury, which turns out to actually be Talos, the Skrull, who we first get introduced to in Captain Marvel, tries to recruit him because he thinks that there's something going on with these elementals, according to what Mysterio calls it. Now, that's the one thing I do like about these about the first two Spider-Man movies in that new trilogy, was that they kind of introduced new villains that were not featured in any of the previous Spider-Man movies before. We got Vulture in the first movie, and we also kind of got the Shocker and the Tinkerer in that movie, and then we get Mysterio in this movie. Now, we do get a reference to another known Spider-Man villain, which was, I forgot his name, but I think his villain name was Hydro Man, where he's made of water, and that was one of the elementals featured, but it wasn't actually the character that we thought it was going to be. But now, the one thing that does kind of bring this movie down for me a little bit was the fact that, just like in the first Spider-Man movie, they revealed that the villain that's going up against Peter is unfortunately someone who has a grudge against Tony Stark. And it turns out that unlike before, it turns out Quentin Beck is actually an ex-Stark employee as well. I don't think Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, was part of the Stark Industries employees, but he did have a grudge against Tony Stark for sort of shutting down his contract that he got. But when it comes to Quentin Beck, it's revealed that during the events of Captain America: Civil War, that little therapy experiment that he had that he nicknamed Barf, it turns out that was actually created by Quentin Beck, who he then got upset because of the way what he decided to call that, and that he turned it into a little therapy session kind of thing. And I think that's not really the best way to introduce villains for the MCU when it comes to Peter. Now, once I get to No Way Home, that'll be a different story. But in regards to Far From Home, I'm going to put it in the C tier, but I still think it's on par with a lot of these other ones, from Minions all the way up till Far From Home. These are definitely much better films than what we got from Rogue One to Aquaman. Now we're getting into the sequel Star Wars trilogy with The Force Awakens. Now, I will say, out of all these movies, The Force Awakens I thought was an okay film. It was definitely a lot better than I thought it was going to be. But I still think it was on par with a lot of stuff. I will say it was definitely better than Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Definitely something that I thought I'd never say, but yeah, as you can see, I've got a lot of movies in the C tier section, and I've got pretty much on par with the A and B's tier, but I don't have that many F tiers, but that's about to change in a second. Next up, we got Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Now, this is the one movie of the sequel trilogy that people hated, and that's mainly because of how they depicted Luke. I will say that when you look at every character that was featured that came back from the original trilogy, Luke got the worst of it, in my opinion, because he wasn't really featured in the Force Awakens until the very end when he was handed the lightsaber, and they could have gone a great route with that when Rey hands him his lightsaber. But this movie, the second this movie starts and it cuts back to them, what does he do? He just chucks it, and basically he is on a remote island, just wasting away, drinking the juices of animals that were left on the island. That he just looks so miserable. How could you do Luke like that? That was the worst way you could have done his character. I will say would put this in the F tier, but it's not as bad as the live-action Lion King or Age of Extinction. I still think it's not a great film, though. And then next up, we got The Rise of Skywalker. Now, this is a movie that most people say is sort of on par with The Last Jedi, because they end up bringing back a character who everybody thought was dead, and that was Emperor Palpatine. And it's revealed that he's actually the grandfather of Rey, who, it turns out, Rey's father, who abandoned her when she was little, was the son of Emperor Palpatine, but we never actually met this son, so it was kind of weird that this just came out of the blue, that Palpatine somehow had a son. But, unfortunately, this is basically making it seem like he wanted the Sith to rise again after he failed to defeat Luke Skywalker, but again, because of how they depicted Luke in The Last Jedi, the way that they portrayed him, he did get an improvement, and that's only because The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker were both directed by J.J. Abrams, whereas The Last Jedi was directed by someone completely different, and they screwed his character up. Because when you look at The Rise of Skywalker, they did kind of try to improve Luke's character arc, but unfortunately it didn't do them any favors. So unfortunately I will have to put this in the D tier. I do think it's a little better than The Last Jedi, but still, it didn't do very well. Next up is the first Avengers movie. Now, I gotta say, the first Avengers movie is definitely one of the better ones. It's definitely better than the Age of Ultron movie, and I'll definitely put it in the B tier, just behind Jurassic World, because I thought it was a great way to end off start the franchise of, and what they did, the reason why I like it is because they did make individual movies introducing Thor, Hulk, Captain America and Iron Man. And then we also had Hawkeye and Black Widow, who were just small cameos in these films. Next up is The Fate of the Furious. Now, again, this is one of those movies that did come out after Furious 7. Unfortunately, this was a movie that I started to get a little disconnected with the Fast and the Furious franchise for. And I gotta say, it really wasn't the best way to continue the franchise after Paul Walker's untimely death. Now, I don't think it's a bad movie per se, but it definitely deserves to be in this list just above Aquaman. I still think Aquaman is the worst out of all these C tier movies. Yeah, I can tell you, this is a long list in the C tier. But next up, we got The Hobbit. Now, this is the first movie of a trilogy of the prequel series for The Lord of the Rings, which we will talk about one of the Lord of the Rings movies in a second. But as for The Hobbit, I didn't think it really made any sense for them to just split the Hobbit book into 3 separate movies. I get maybe doing it into 2 movies, but I feel like this movie was not as engaging as I was hoping it would be. And for that reason, I gotta probably put it just above, I would say, Iron Man 3. Again, I got a lot of C movies in here, but everything up until Spider-Man No Way Home, I think is in the C tier, is probably the better ones, I should say. Next up is The Incredibles 2. Now, just like Finding Dory, this is a sequel that took many years to make for a Pixar movie, and I will say it's definitely an improvement. In fact, I actually think it's so much better than Finding Dory that I'm actually going to put it just at the bottom of B tier. Definitely think it's a really good sequel to the first Incredibles, and it does sort of bring back the supers in a way that I think is really nice. Next up, we got The Return of the King, the last movie of the Lord of the Rings trilogy that everybody was so happy about the way it ended. It not only did it sort of show a small backstory into Smeagol, who we all know as Gollum, but it was the way they ended the trilogy was a great way to end off the movie franchise version of Lord of the Rings. And I will say it's definitely better than The Hobbit for sure. I wouldn't say it's necessarily in the S tier for me, but it definitely deserves to be in the A tier, maybe just above Beauty and the Beast and Joker. Definitely something I think is an improvement. Now, next up, we got Titanic, and this is the very first movie, I believe, that I ever saw that was made by James Cameron. At least in that order, it was Titanic, then the first Avatar. Now, he does add a little bit of a romance into this true story movie, but I still think it was really good. This is definitely one of those movies that goes in the S tier. I didn't think it was as good as Jurassic Park, but it definitely falls in that category. Next up, we got Toy Story 3. Again, just like with with the Avengers movies, such a great way to end to what should have been a trilogy. I think it was the best way to end off that trilogy, especially when it comes to the Andy story. Next up is Toy Story 4. Now, like I just said with Toy Story 3, that ended the Andy story arc. But this movie supposedly ends the Woody arc. And I will say, I didn't think Toy Story 4 was necessary. And heck, there's even a 5th one that's in the works currently, and I don't know what they're going to do. If they actually bring back Andy, which is what I've been hearing in the rumors, that's probably going to end up turning out terrible. But in regards to this one, finishing off the Woody franchise, I think definitely I thought was okay, but it was definitely, they really should have ended it off after 3, but I still think this was a good enough film to stay in the A tier. Next up is Zootopia. Now, this is a movie that I thought I didn't think I would like that much, but I actually did. In fact, this is another movie that's also got a sequel greenlit. And there was one specific fan theory that so many people are urging Disney to put in the second film, and that's a love story in between the main two characters, Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde, and I kind of want to see that. But when it comes to this first movie, I love the way they do this whole like discrimination story in there, and I think it was a good balance, and I think it's going to go in the A tier, just below Joker. Next up, we got the very first Harry Potter movie, The Sorcerer's Stone. At least that's how I know it here in America. Now, so for Harry Potter and The Sorcerer's Stone, it was the beginning of the franchise, and I think Chris Columbus did an amazing job. So good that this movie also deserves to be in the S tier. Again, you got a lot of movies in here that actually finish off a franchise, like the two Avengers movies, Harry Potter, and Toy Story 3, all of which were like great ways to end a franchise. Or in Toy Story's case, a trilogy. Next up, we got Spider-Man No Way Home. Again, another movie that finished off a trilogy. Now, I love the nostalgia of this. Now, you may find this shocking, but I actually am going to put it just at the top of A tier. Why? Because even though I do think I really love the nostalgia of bringing back old actors from past Spider-Man movies to play their characters again, due to it being a multiverse story, I think it was such a good story. And I can't wait to see what they do with Spider-Man in the future. Next up, shockingly, is Top Gun Maverick. Now, this is a movie I went to see with my mom last year, and I did not think I was going to like it, but it was definitely a really engaging movie, but it's not going to be in the A tier, obviously. It's probably just going to be just at the top of B tier. Ooh, there you go. Mainly because I saw the first movie on Paramount Plus, and I gotta say, this movie definitely shows how well Tom Cruise can be when it comes to doing his own stunts in a way. And now we got the big movie of this remaining 5 movies, the original animated Lion King. This, as you all know, is definitely going in the S tier, just above Toy Story 3 in my opinion. This was like the best way. This is one of the best original Disney animated films I ever saw. It was definitely it was way better than what they tried to do with the live action movie. And no one can ever beat out this original. Now we get into a movie that I mentioned before, Jurassic World Dominion. This is the one Jurassic World movie that they finally decided to bring back all 3 of the original trio to meet up with the new stars, but the franchise is about dinosaurs. Yet for some reason in this movie they decided to bring in locusts, like these bugs that create like an epidemic in a way, eating crops, and yet the whole franchise is about dinosaurs. So why would they call it Jurassic World or whatever and then not feature the dinosaurs too much? And I mean, it's a good thing they brought back the original trio, but because they brought back they put in that little thing, you may find this shocking, but I'm actually going to put it at the bottom of D tier. I will say that this was not as good of a ending as I thought it was going to be when it comes to the Rise of Skywalker, or even Dark of the Moon in a way. But now we get into some much better films like Avatar: The Way of Water. To me, this is definitely going in the S tier. I'm actually going to put it just above the first movie because I do actually kind of like the second movie better in a way. It really does continue the arc in a way, and that I'm surprised at the one villain they brought back, and he's going to have a huge impact for the next few films because there are 3 other movies coming out. So our second to last movie is the Super Mario Brothers movie, which ironically just came out this year, and I gotta say, this is a way to can start a cinematic universe. I will say Chris Pratt as the voice of Mario. I know there was a lot of controversy surrounding his character, but I cannot believe just how crazy that ended up being. And Jack Black as the voice of Bowser, his song Peaches, that to me did so well that I actually think it did much better than Zootopia in my opinion. Definitely in the A tier, but something I think was a really good start to a franchise. And finally, we are down to the most recent movie to make $1 billion, and that's Barbie. Now, I cannot believe I actually enjoyed this movie. I thought I was going to hate it because of the cringe-worthy moment at the beginning of the film, but then I thought, you know what? This actually is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Now, it's still, unfortunately, because of when it was filmed, it still has a few story points that most people are not going to like. To me, I still thought it did so good that I may actually put it just at the top of C tier. I thought it was an okay film, but as you can clearly see on this tier list, I got a lot of C tier movies, but I still got some B, A, and S movies that I think are such good movies that everything that's in the S tier I would gladly watch over again, and the same can be said for the A tier and B tier. C tier, sometimes it just depends. D and F, definitely movies that I would never rewatch more than once. But anyways, that's my tier list for this. So that is my tier list for the $1 billion movies that have come out. Not too sure if any other movies that are come out for the rest of the year are going to make $1 billion, but I will eventually go back and rewatch all these movies, and especially if another movie comes out that makes $1 billion, and I will probably redo this list because this will be the first. This is the first in a long line of lists that I'm going to do for the tier list. So keep an eye out for my next tier list video. And as always, I will see all you guys in the next video.